for the gifts that we have to give, and for this community, which truly seeks to live out its covenant that love is the spirit of this church and service is its law. May we be grateful.
Like the first farm wife, Eve, the farm wife in my poems faces a number of losses. She loses her cows, her husband passes away, and even the farm itself is threatened by the takeover of corporate farms. But through it all, she retains her sense of awe and her connection to divine mystery. The farm wife finds grace in her empty barn. Inside the house, dust is dust, but here it looks holy, hanging in slanted light that slips between boards. Jacob's ladder could be rungs to a loft where barn swallows brush the dark with the curve of their wings. Every joint is pegged tight as Noah's Ark, but there's room for everyone, nesting sparrows and mice that scatter from burlap sacks. When I slide the big door back, sunlight rushes in to fill the empty bin where Jesus could be reaching up to touch black and white faces gazing down. I like to picture him swaddled by the breath of cows.
This June, UUI is delighted to be exhibiting artwork from the Religion, Spirituality, and the Arts Seminar. The Religion, Spirituality, and the Arts Seminar is a group of artists that meet together to create different forms of art in response to having studied and analyzed a particular religious text with Rabbi Sandy Sasso and other humanities experts. But we're not only exhibiting the work, we are collaborating with RSA artists to bring UUI two special services in June, this one today and a second service on June 24th. So I want to give a much thanks to the artist Dan Cooper and to Wendy Doherty, who have been helping put these services together and who cooked this up for you all. And I'm delighted to welcome today our guest speakers from the RSA seminar. Shari Wagner, who graced us with her beautiful poetry, was Indiana's 5th Poet Laureate 2016 to 2017. The author of 2 books of poems. Her poems have appeared in North American Review, Indiana Review, many other journals. She is co-author and editor of multiple nonfiction works, winner of literary awards and grants too numerous to mention. She teaches with the Indiana Writers Center since 2008 and is also on the faculty of the Religion, Spirituality, and the Arts Seminar. David Landis is an artist who is a member of the initial RSA seminar cohort. In addition to being an artist, he has also worked as a firefighter, EMT, and paramedic for over 28 years. He's taught workshops along with Rabbi Sasso based on the RSA process and experience, and continues to study, teach, and speak on the important role of creativity in our lives. And finally, Sandy Eisenberg Sasso is Rabbi Emerita of Congregation Beth El Zedek, where she's served for 36 years. She was the first woman ordained from the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College in 1974. She and her husband, Dennis C. Sasso, are the first rabbinical couple in world Jewish history. After retiring from the synagogue, Sasso became director of the Religion, Spirituality, and the Arts Initiative. For 4 years, the program was hosted by Butler University. Beginning in the fall of 2018, it is part of the IUPUI, Arts and Humanities Institute. Rabbi Sasso is the author of a many award-winning children's book and 2 books for adults. She's the co-founder of Women for Change Indiana and writes a monthly column for the Indianapolis Star. And finally, Rabbi Sasso was recently presented, along with her husband, Rabbi Dennis Sasso, the 2018 Interfaith Ambassadors of the Year Award. So we are humbled and delighted that they are sharing their gifts with us today. Now I'd like to welcome up David Landis and Rabbi Sasso. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much. It really is a pleasure to be here with you this morning. I keep bumping into people I know, so it feels like I'm really part of your community as well. I actually had a book published by the Unitarian Press, so I say we have some fellowship. I, too, want to add my thanks to Jamie, to Wendy, to Elizabeth, and all of you who have invited RSA into your sanctuary to share the experience with us. I want to especially thank Dan Cooper, who I know spent hours, because I have gotten so many emails from Dan, hours and hours putting this together. He, too, was in the first cohort of RSA, and so I am very grateful for the work that he has done. And it's great to sort of have a reunion with so many of the artists over the years. And I'm especially delighted to be sharing this with Dan Landis. So when I was about halfway through my rabbinate, someone asked me for some magazine article, could you tell me what was the text that influenced you the most in your rabbinate? And of course, oh my gosh, there's so many texts to choose from. And I thought for a while, and my answer was the absence of text. Now, you can understand I was the first woman in my seminary. Very few women, there were no women rabbis at the time. And what I discovered was in reading all this text that I didn't have a voice there. There were stories and names that were missing. And it's this sort of space that needs to be filled that I think really prompted me to create Religion, Spirituality, and the Arts. So I would say that most people read the Bible, probably not Unitarians, but most people, wanting to know the literal meaning of the text. Jewish tradition also wants to know what the text doesn't say, wants to know how to fill the absences. What has been left out? What are the empty spaces of the narrative, and what are we to do with them? Most people, but I guess not Unitarians, approach the Bible to find answers. How am I supposed to live my life? What are my values? Jews approach the Bible to discover the questions and the questions behind the questions. What are the questions we should really care about? The traditional Jewish method of exploring the text in this way is about filling in the blank spaces, asking questions, reconciling contradictions, dealing with theological conundrums. This method is known as Midrash, which really just means the word comes from seeking out. Each generation reads its life story into the text. The Bible is not the final word, but the first word. We are not intended to take the text literally. We are intended to take it seriously. And those two things are very different. So I want to share with you this Hasidic tale that will give you a good understanding of what we were doing in our seminar that created this beautiful array of art and poetry, and how wonderful it is to work with faculty like Shari Wagner. We're really grateful. So the rabbis had a debate. They always had debates, and they never agreed, of what actually happened on Sinai. What was heard on Sinai? Now, some people said, well, of course, the whole Torah. The first 5 books, that's what was heard. But others said, no, that's way too long. They never would have stayed that long. Standing all that time. It says it was the entire 10 Commandments, because that's the essence. And another said, no, that's still too long, too much. It was the first commandment. I am the Lord, your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. That was enough. Once people knew that, everything followed. Then someone said, no, I don't even think that. I think it was the first word of the first commandment, and that is I. But in Hebrew, it is Anochi. And still, a Hasidic rabbi named Rabbi Mendel of Remenov said, oh, no, you're all wrong. Not even the first word of the first commandment, but only the first letter of the first word of the first commandment. And that letter, just need to know a bit of Hebrew. That letter is Aleph. And by the way, it has no sound. It has no sound. But actually, precisely, it's not actually silence. It's the beginning of sound. It's like when you open your mouth to speak, that's the Aleph. So what happened at Sinai is the beginning of a conversation. It wasn't any particular content. People filled in that content in their continual search for transcendence and meaning and the divine. It was the beginning of a conversation with the divine, a conversation in which we are all called to participate. There was not only one way to understand the text, but there were many ways. So you're a Unitarian, so I'm thinking this approach is not terribly disturbing to you. You have to understand, when I speak at other churches, they are like blown away by this. I mean, it's very difficult to believe that you can bring yourself to the text. But the truth is that we have, for a long time, brought ourselves to the text. So I'll just give you a simple example. What is the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil in the Garden of Eden? What would you say? The apple, right? We all think it's an apple. Ha ha, guess what? It doesn't say it. It just says the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is what Eve ate. What's the fruit? We don't know. And actually, the rabbis come up with many answers. It was a fig, because after they got fig leaves, so that made sense. It was maybe it was a pomegranate. That seems more likely. How many apples grow in the Middle East? Very few apple trees. That totally doesn't make sense. So where in the world did we get the apple? It's from the Vulgate, the Latin translation of the Bible. When they saw fruit, they used the word malum, which means evil, but it also means apple. And so when people read the Latin translation, they said, well, it must have been an apple. So really the process of reading into the text has been a long tradition. We are not doing this anew. And just one other brief example. So the last book in the Hebrew Bible is Chronicles, which talks about the rebuilding of the temple and returning to Jerusalem. What's the last book in the Christian Bible? Oh, I don't mean the New Testament. I'm sorry. I just mean, what's the last book? So sorry. It's the last book in the Old Testament among Christians. You don't know? How is that possible? It is, what'd you say? It's Malachi. And why? Because Malachi ends by talking about Elijah coming and announcing messianic days. So even the way we order the books is a kind of midrash. We are interpreting the text to be able to tell our story. So I'll give you one more example, because then David will tell you how all this makes sense for art. Cain and Abel. Terry mentioned the story in her poetry. It says, and Cain said to his brother Abel, and then they were in the field, and Cain killed his brother Abel. What's missing? What did they argue about? My God, what was this conversation? That was the most important part of the story, and they left it out. So the rabbis in the first centuries of the Common Era, around the same time that Jesus was teaching, and then also up until the probably 1200, so maybe the 13th, 12th century, said, okay, we're going to tell stories. We're going to tell stories. And they offered at least 3 reasons of how Cain and Abel were arguing. What did they argue about? They argued about property. Okay, Cain says, you're standing on my land, fly off. And Abel says, you're wearing clothes from my wool from my sheep, strip. And so they argued about property. They also argued about where the temple was to be built. Now, don't worry that that's totally not chronological, because it's okay. There's no early or late in the Bible. So they argued about religion. In my place, in my place. And then, believe it or not, this takes a leap of imagination. They argued about sex. They argued about women. And you'll go, women? What women? There's Cain and Abel, Adam and Eve, you know. But, of course, the rabbis imagined there were other women, and they both wanted the same woman. Now, when you think about this, this is exactly what we argue about today, okay? We argue about who owns what, you know, what are our boundaries, what's our property. We argue about religion, oh, my God, yes. And we argue about sexuality. So when you fill in these spaces, you begin to tell your story. And that is what we have tried to do in approaching the text in religion, spirituality, and the arts. We would read one text. This coming year, we're going to do Lot's wife. I'm very excited about that. And we looked at many ways of looking at this text, through religious interpretation, through poetry, through music, through visual art. And then these amazing artists, and my greatest gift is getting to know all of them. They have really enriched my life. Create something that I could never have imagined. They play with Scripture. There is the text, and there is you. What happens in the space in between is the making of Midrash, of art, of poetry, of beauty. And now I'd like to invite David Landis to tell you how that all actually happened. Thank you, Tracy. She's a poet with RSA as well. I should just say there's a book about Midrash. So happens I'm the author outside, and I'd be happy to cite. Don't feel obligated, but if you'd like to know more, there's more to learn.
Neither I nor the people I grew up with in a very conservative Wesleyan church upbringing would have understood how much this rabbi has changed my understanding of my spirituality, of my creative process, of life in general, and of creativity. And that's what I'm here to speak about. I'm bothered by, annoyed, wrong word. What might be possible if each of us, if you, if I, grasped, understood the creativity that is within us. There is an energy in this world that we live. Whether we pay attention to it or not is another thing. But there's an energy, whether it be my atheist friends who see the world purely from a biological standpoint, there's an energy all around us wanting to create. The definition of creation, something more, something that wasn't before. If you're a spiritual person looking at it from a spiritual perspective, however you understand God or that spiritual being, it's a part of who we are. We want to create. We mistakenly misunderstand creativity first in its definition. Creativity is large and small. It's profound and it's simple. Creativity happens every day. And what I have, what I have discovered in this process of growing and experiencing and exploring creativity is that we often forget, we often don't understand, we often don't see, we don't sense, we don't feel and experience those creative moments that we all have. And that's what I want for us as we go from this place, to remember, to notice, and to somehow understand our creativity more deeply. What might be possible if each of us grasped the creativity on the inside? I just was at my nephew's graduation. I picked out a card. We sat around and listened to him read graduation cards with all kinds of platitudes. You can do anything, dream, and on and on and on. All the things that we say to graduates and hopes for their future and hopes for their lives. And while the sentiment is there, it often does not communicate the depth of the effort and the work that those things will take in their lives. And in like manner, that is the same for creativity. We talk about creativity, and it's something that is tossed around and is in some ways a platitude, a simplistic idea, but it requires work. And that, through this process that we have gone through as artists led by Rabbi Sasso, is what we went through, was work of creativity. Creativity's increase. It's that simple. I want to expand this conversation so that it includes all of us, not just artists. It's a foundation of who we are as human beings. Creativity is found in art, but I have that backward. Art is creativity, but creativity isn't necessarily art. Just because you don't call yourself an artist, just because you don't express yourself as an artist, just because you don't experience the world as an artist, does not mean you aren't creative. That's a basic misunderstanding. We misunderstand terms. Creativity and art are two different things. Artists tend to practice their creativity through the arts. But all of us experience the world and have creative energy in our lives, whether we pay attention to it or not. My work as a firefighter, it is very difficult to explain sometimes to people that haven't been brought up to understand creativity in this way. Creative firefighting is a very creative endeavor. It's a process of solving problems. It's a process of bringing something new, a new solution to a problem that needs to be solved. How this relates to Midrash. Midrash, this idea of bringing conversation, bringing questions, bringing potential to the idea of spirituality. If it's a spiritual text or it's just a spiritual question that we're working or struggling with or don't understand, an element of life that we don't comprehend, that we can bring conversation to it. That it's not something that somebody else necessarily has, but it is something that we can wrestle with and work with and develop our own understanding, whether that be in conversation with each other, conversation with spiritual texts, conversations with community, conversations with that creative impulse. Back to those graduation cards and the simplicity and the platitudes that don't communicate the difficult work. What I understood through this creative process, that sculpture back there in the corner is mine. It is based on the Abraham taking Isaac to the mountain to be sacrificed and all of the tremendous implications that brought with it. We can talk about the story afterward. But it was a very difficult thing I'm an artist. I bring my perspective. There's a question. I'm an artist. I don't know the answer. And I had to work and work and work through the weeks of communication, conversation, questioning this spiritual understanding that I had. The sculpture is entitled, What Now? Abraham takes Isaac to the mountain, and they struggle, and there's a potential sacrifice. The sacrifice doesn't happen. They go back, and a father attempts to kill his son, to sacrifice his son. It goes on and on with lots of questions. What I came away from that with, after much work and struggle and questioning and wondering, is what now? What are we going to do with that story? We all have a story. We carry our past with us. What are we going to do with that story now? And that's how I translated that small scriptural passage into something larger and something I didn't expect. It's something new, some new understanding, a depth and a richness that wasn't there before. Because through this process of asking and participating in creation, I was able to understand my spirituality more deeply. And since I've done that, I've come back to a larger, again, understanding of our creativity as a basic impulse of who we are as human beings. What might be possible if each of us grasped The creativity, that creative energy is on the inside of us. How could our world be changed? How can our lives be that much more rich? I want to thank you for this time. I want to thank you for this opportunity. I want to thank you for this conversation. I would like the conversation to continue. One last thought. Oftentimes, as you leave here and you think about creativity, which I hope you do, begin to pay attention to those creative impulses, those thoughts that you might have that prior to now you said, that's just my idea. It's just my thought. And that's silly. That won't work. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter if it's large or it's small, if it's reaching out to a friend in a new and different way, if it's creating a new meal, if it's understanding a new poem, if it's understanding new text that you're reading, if it's the desire to create something, to write, to bring it to your work. Creativity is yours to be explored, to be experimented with, to be played with. It's lots of work, it's lots of effort. But what might be possible if you understood that creative impulse? Rabbi Sasso is not only the director, but creator of this program. And as I said, I am profoundly grateful to her for the influence and impact it has had on my spiritual life, on my artistic life, and on my life as a whole. It's created opportunities. It's brought us together this morning. It's created friends and artists that I now have that I didn't before. It's created art that I didn't understand before, because she acted on a creative impulse, a creative idea. So thank you, and I look forward to talking more.
Would you mind if we just took a second and asked all the people who have been in RSA as artists, poets, musicians to just rise so you can see them all? And thank you all for coming, and thanks for giving us this opportunity.